Hey, Foilers. Ben and I need your help as we continue to work to grow it for God and increase the amount of listeners to the podcast. Here's what you can do to help. Head on over to our website, thetfhc.com, and be sure to sign up for the email newsletter. Doing so will make sure you get content as soon as it's available. Also, join us over at the Tinfoil Hat Club podcast page on Facebook, and be sure to follow, like, subscribe, and most importantly, share with everyone you think would enjoy the show on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Thanks for being fantastic and for all the love and support. Now, back to the show. Welcome to the Tinfoil Hat Club. I'm Kyle.
And I'm Ben.
And welcome back for episode 2. So Ben and I talked, and we figured the natural extension for this episode to talk about would be what other than giants. Seems to be a logical fit, right?
Yeah.
So where we kind of left off last week, we got into a little post-flood stuff, but not a lot. We really covered the whole story, because really the vast majority of, well, really all of Enoch is pretty much pre-flood.
Yeah.
So, and the thing that we did read, or we talked about last week, was Genesis 6:4, where it talks about, and here's the exact scripture, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. So that's where we picked that up, right? Talking about the flood. When the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them, they were the heroes of old, men of renown. Now, that's from the NIV, so depending on which version you read, you have a different flavor. But the thing that you definitely pick up, and it's scripturally reinforced when you go read, is these Nephilim and the giants were around after the flood. And that is probably I don't know if there's a greater debate in like Bible, scholarly Bible circles, then how?
Yeah.
How is that possible?
Yeah, I would say next to baptism, maybe.
You mean like to baptize or not to baptize?
Or how to do it.
This is the question. Yes, full immersion or partial immersion. That's what you're talking about.
Yes,
right?
or sprinkling.
Okay. Sprinkling. Just sprinkle a little bit on. Good. Yeah. So, yeah. Genesis 6:4, and then how we get giants after the flood. Now, that's an interesting thing to talk about right out of the gate, because there are a couple schools of thought to that. One of the schools of thought is it was a localized flood and not a global flood.
But there's so much proof that it was a worldwide flood.
Yeah, you and I agree. I don't subscribe to that theory. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
The literature, the way that everything reads, does not. It points to a global flood, not a localized. So yeah, I don't think that's possible. And then, so the other one would be what they call second incursion. So again, you would have to have something similar happen. You have a divine being, an angel, a watcher, have sex with a woman, and we reproduce Nephilim. And there's no scriptural backing to that either.
Even Enoch, Michael was like, "Oh man, look what just happened to this guy. Nobody's ever going to do that again."
Right. Yeah, I'm like, if I was an angel, I'd be like, "Yeah, that's a hot stove. I don't think I'm going to touch that one."
I've been in trouble with my dad when I was a kid, and I never did anything what I did then, but always done something else.
Yeah, exactly. And whatever your punishment was, it didn't include being bound in chains of gloomy darkness for all eternity until Judgment Day, and then you're going to be thrown into a fire and burned forever.
Well, I'm sure he probably thought about that.
As has all parents.
Yes.
So that theory doesn't hold water.
church
either, because there's no support for it.
No.
And if anybody out there, wants to prove me otherwise, I'm all ears. I'd love to hear it. So the other theory that you and I have talked about would be when you trace back all of the post-flood Nephilim and giants, undoubtedly you can trace this. They all do go back to Ham's line. So you have Shem, Ham, Japheth that are Noah's first three sons, and Ham, all of the giant clans that are talked about in the Old Testament trace back to him.
Yeah.
And not specifically just one of his sons, but I read two of his sons. So Egypt and also Canaan.
Yes.
So Canaan is the first one we can zero in on because it's an event that happens right after the flood that is, you and I talked obviously before we hit the record button today a little bit, and that there's kind of a couple different ways to interpret this event that happens.
Yeah.
And this is really in Deuteronomy fairly early on, but it talks about how Noah grew a vineyard. He's drinking wine. He gets drunk. I'm trying to remember in Genesis if it talks about all of them getting drunk, but he specifically,
I think it was just Noah.
Just him.
Yeah.
Some of the other literature goes a little bit deeper than that all of the boys and dad were imbibing together and that they might have all gotten a little popped. But specifically Noah, he winds up going into his tent and he's laying in there naked. And the way that the text reads is that Ham went in and he saw his father naked, or he uncovered his father's nakedness, I think is the way that it reads.
Yeah.
Right? And he goes outside. He doesn't do anything to cover up his dad or, any of that stuff. He goes outside and he tells his two brothers, and they put the cloaks or their dad's robe, I believe, or a blanket maybe.
Yeah, something, and they walked in backwards.
They walked in backwards so they didn't see him naked, and they covered him up. And then when Noah comes to, and he gets rid of his grape fog, he is extremely angry, and he curses Ham. Well, actually, he curses Canaan, who is Ham's son, firstborn, I do believe.
Yeah.
Not Ham himself. Now, you have a theory. I'll let you go ahead and go with how this all ties in together.
Well, we were discussing, and I said, well, I think that Ham saw Canaan, and he had all giant traits, 6 fingers, 6 toes, 2 rows of teeth. And he was like, uh-oh. So he sleeps with his mom. That's, it's just a theory. It's, I'm not saying that's it. But it's just, a way to think about it.
Yeah.
Because the way I look at it, like with Lot's daughters, we're the only people alive now, so they get dad drunk and.
Oh, yeah. To procreate.
Yes.
Line.
Yes.
Yeah. I do remember that story.
And so that's how I take it.
Mm-hmm.
I know some other people go way out.
Yeah.
And I don't even agree with that.
Yeah, talking about defiling his own father.
Yeah, I don't agree with that because that's not what it says.
Yeah.
But that's what I think. It was like, uh-oh, my wife's no good, quote unquote. She's got bad genes. I know mom's genes are good. But like I said, it's just a theory. It's not, I'm not going to hang my hat on that.
Now, again, we talked about before we kind of got going today, the reason you say that, does it go back to the Deuteronomy passage where it's kind of outlining the sexual sin of what you can't do?
Yes.
And the way that it is worded in there is you should not sleep with your mother, your father's mother, or your father's wife, which would be your mother, because you will uncover her nakedness.
Yes.
And the same kind of phrasing around nakedness is used in this particular passage and story explaining this.
Yes, it's like if you see your mother, you're seeing your father's nakedness, and that's no good. You're so technically, if you do that, you're supposed to be taken out, and killed.
Yeah, right. And so that was where I have trouble with that theory because of that. Now, granted, you could almost make the argument that because we're in a situation where we have to repopulate the earth, maybe we didn't follow through with this. But normally, under those circumstances, or at least how it's set up later, both the man and the woman would be killed.
Yeah,
they would be taken out and stoned. Now, to be fair, that is really not outlined until you get to Deuteronomy. So this is happening much later down the line.
Yeah, this is like,
right.
The only law they have is, we're
pretty much starting at ground zero. Yeah. Don't drink blood.
That's right.
And don't kill each other.
That's the law. Yeah, that's the law.
Don't do all the things that I just wiped everyone out for.
Yes.
So my thinking with this is, and I had a really good debate with the group I go to on Friday around this. We had a good debate at the table. I do not subscribe to this theory. I think this is a translational issue sometimes, and you can run into this when you start digging into translation. You can really run the gamut all over the map. And I know the KJV specifically kind of talks in that nakedness line. I think in some of the other literature, Jubilee specifically supports this a little bit more of what I'm going to say. Is the way that I take that is I think he literally just saw his dad naked, and instead of covering him up, he went outside and was mocking his father to his brothers. And I think Jubilee kind of actually has a little blurb in there about that. Now, it's kind of in parentheses, so that could be the translator taking liberties too. And the reason I think that it was as simple as that, because of the shame of nakedness. Here you've gone through this whole sexual sin. And the other thing too is you go all the way back to the garden. And the first thing that Adam and Eve noticed after they had sinned was that they were naked.
Yeah.
And there's a great emphasis back in Genesis in that story being placed around how before the sin they were naked and knew it not. They didn't know they were doing anything wrong. And then here you have munchies from the tree. They eat God's snacks. And now all of a sudden we realize we're naked and we're shamed. So there's a stigma of shame attached with nakedness that kind of heavily carries even today. Like we talked about this too. And granted, I wish it was more so, but there's still an element of shame when someone you see someone naked, or they see you naked and it's not your spouse. It's someone that you did not intend.
Yeah.
And
that's why there's locks on bathroom doors.
Yes, sir. Indeed, there is. Yes.
Don't forget to lock it.
Don't forget to lock. Or like every guy's most uncomfortable moment, the communal changing area at the pool.
Yes.
Nah, it's a horrible place. It's a horrible place. And that kind of speaks to the society that we live in today, where we don't treat it with the decency and respect that we should,
Yeah.
And I'm watching that. That's another thing too that's interesting. I'm watching that happen more and more, where especially the women at Hollywood is really bad about this. And I know we've talked sex Hollywood, that's not a new story that's been around forever. But now we're going to these events and we're literally wearing like sheer outfits, or pasties or some ridiculous thing, and there's absolutely not only no shame about it, but it's like they're shaming other people for shaming them, and like that they're doing this, and we're saying it's not okay.
Yeah.
How dare we do that?
I know.
And it just speaks to our societal cesspool that we've created.
Yes.
But so either way, what happens from that event is you have a very unhappy Noah that curses his grandson, and not necessarily Ham, his son that does this, but his grandson. So Ham's son. And I know there's a lot of things with that too, of how important to the Israelites and to the Jews the firstborn is. They have rights to everything.
Yeah.
You get everything. You get the keys to the kingdom. It would be the equivalent for us nowadays of like the royal family.
Yeah.
It's like, that's why Harry's over here hanging out in the United States, because he's like, whatever he is in line now is, his brother keeps having more and more kids. He gets further and further down in the pecking order that he doesn't matter anymore. And so you kind of have the giants start popping up down the line after this. Now, I want to go back to something you said because I'm curious. Where have you read or where have you get the thinking that Canaan maybe was an oddball?
Just wait. I mean, I'm just like putting myself in the situation. I'm not like this, but just for the fact that
I'm glad all of your kids look fine.
No, it's like because that is a line of giants, and
right.
So I'm just okay if he has the traits of some kind of Nephilim, whatever.
Yeah,
and it's just like 6 fingers,
right?
6 toes, 2 rows of teeth, and he's big. That's my thinking.
Yeah.
It's not like I know I'm what is it, eisegesis and exegesis. I'm not doing any of that. This is just like my thinking of that kind of makes sense.
How this could have happened.
Yeah. And I know I'm gonna probably go a little weird here.
Oh no, we shouldn't do that on this podcast, Ben. Whatever are you talking about?
And I know some people, this might be a little touchy. Some people, I think, believe that Canaan was Africa, and so that was cursed, and I think that goes back to the slaves too.
Really?
Yes.
Go with that. Like,
like they since they were already cursed, then they had to serve.
That they got basically treated that way.
Yes.
Interesting.
As slaves.
Yeah, which obviously history lesson. A lot of that came from how they made their way to the boat was their own people. Selling them, capturing them and selling them off.
Yeah.
Which slavery isn't a new concept. I mean, there's talks of slavery in the Bible, but it's a different. It's
when you put scripture to make it right, it's wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the other thing too is how slavery is discussed a lot of times in the Bible. Not always, but some of the time is it's talked in a way that goes into more indentured servitude due to debt.
Yes, not
I'm going to smack you on the head, snatch you up, send you to another country, and sell you off to someone who's going to treat you like a plow.
Which I was listening. Started listening to the Torah again, the law, first 5 books of the Bible this week, and it said stripe for stripe, tooth for tooth, eye for eye, and it was even towards the slave. So if the owner of the slave did anything, it had to be done to the owner as well.
So if you mistreat your slave, hey, have fun because it's going to be paid back to you.
Yes, that was God's law. Yeah,
which ties into like the Jubilee, side of the coin that, I think Jesus talked about the parable of the guy who owed the debt and the guy that he owed the debt to gave him forgiveness, wiped his slate clean, and then he turned around and went to the people that owed him money and didn't do the same, was like, you're going to pay me your money.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I get you there.
We need to treat everybody the same.
Exactly.
We need to love everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
Love them towards Jesus, right?
Yep. Yeah, and the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth thing, that goes back a long ways.
Yes.
When you get into these extra biblical texts, what you find out is that actually goes back all the way to Cain. I don't know if you've read this or not.
Yeah.
So it talks about Cain killed Abel with the stone, and it was written in the law of heaven at that particular point, the tablets of heaven, that as you kill someone, so should you be killed.
Yes.
The other interesting thing that it talks about in Jubilees, which is, it's not in the Bible, it's in Jubilees, so take it for what you will, is it talks about when Cain died. Do you remember the story? And how he died?
I'll let you go first.
He died the same year as Adam, and his house fell in on him. It was a stone house, and it fell in on him, and basically God killed him the same way that he had killed his brother. And it talks about that a little bit in there because obviously God said nobody can kill Cain or they're going to be cursed, 7 times?
Yeah.
And so everybody left him alone, and he goes and he kind of lives his life, and he has his family and and they all die in the flood anyway. And that's how he was killed. And the whole emphasis there is the eye for an eye thing.
So I was going like in Enoch, where the angel's taking Enoch around and he sees this soul. And he's like, who is that? And he goes, that is Abel. He is praying to God that he would wipe out Cain's descendants.
Yeah, that was a interesting read in Enoch. I had to read that several times to understand that passage, because really it's breaking down the compartments of Sheol.
Yeah.
The where you go when you die, or pre-Christ. And now there's a lot that's a whole.
I'm sorry, we switched directions.
That's a whole other episode. But no, that's an interesting thing, because I do remember that story too, and that's kind of fascinating. It alludes to that there were other people. It was almost like there was a special compartment for people who had been murdered.
Yeah.
Did you read that too?
Yeah, it's like, and I was like, so if some people are murdered and then they're praying,
yeah,
and that would go to today, right?
Yeah,
that's the question. I'm asking that as a question.
I don't know. That's because everything you read about Abel is that he was just.
Yeah.
He had favor in the eyes of the Lord. So one would think that, he wasn't sent to hell, or, the bad side of town, the torture side of Sheol,
yeah,
or Hades, or whatever you want to refer to it. But yeah, that was an interesting read.
Yeah,
in Enoch. So
sorry, I took a left-hand turn right there.
Welcome to the Tinfoil Hat Club.
That's right.
We turn left, we turn right, we turn in circles. We do all kinds of stuff, Ben.
But it was just
it's all ties together.
Yes, because now we can go back to what was going on.
Yeah, so you have the thing with Ham happen, and then you have Noah cursing Canaan, and then as we move forward in time, the giants really came from two of Ham's sons. They came from Canaan, and they also came from Egypt. Now, I don't mean the country. Literally, Ham's son, one of his sons, was named Egypt.
It would have been the clan would have, I think, Mitzrayim.
Is that what you were talking about earlier?
Yeah.
Yeah, it says in parentheses after that, that's where the Philistines came from.
Yeah.
And we obviously know, famous story, David and Goliath. Goliath was the Philistine. That's another giant tie-in as well. Not that everybody knows that story for the most part, even if you're not necessarily a churchgoer. Everybody knows the story of David and Goliath for the most part. It's almost as famous as the flood story.
And he was a little one too.
Yeah, he was only like 9 feet tall.
He was,
I heard 6'6" to 9'9". But I'm like, if you talk about where a cubit, so everybody needs to understand a cubit, there's a couple different measurements for cubit. A cubit, from what I read though, for the most part during then, was the tip from the measurement from the tip of your finger out with your arm outstretched to your elbow.
Yeah, about 18 inches.
18 inches. If you're a taller guy, maybe a little bit more. Now there was a royal cubit too, where they would add on like 2 or 3 inches.
I think it was 20 or 22 inches.
Okay,
like
right. But most of the time, if you use 18 inches, you're going to be in a relatively good space.
So does that mean the kings have longer arms?
Yeah, right.
Royal.
Well, I guess they've started digging up now, like some of the kings, like the Egyptian kings and stuff, since they were all inbred and it was all weird. They had like a bunch of birth defects. They found for sure that King Tut, he had some pretty bad birth defects. Couldn't walk right, maybe a spinal issues, and was maybe a little deformed or something. But yeah,
that's strange. They want to keep that bloodline pure.
I would think so. It ain't working so well for them.
Nope.
So yeah, you have the giants start popping up, and that's really an interesting place, because as you move forward a little bit in time and everybody starts to repopulate the earth and everybody starts to get their own spaces, right before Noah dies. And again, this isn't necessarily in Genesis that I remember, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but you can read about it, and it is in Jubilees, where it talks about how they divvied up the earth. And this makes a lot of sense. I mean, we do have other things in the Bible that talks about this.
It would be under the Table of Nations. And
yeah, and I read that this week in preparation for the show, and I don't remember seeing it in there. Unless I'm wrong, I could completely be wrong. And when you start reading all these things, your brain starts to
the
stew
Table
it
of
all
Nations
together.
just tells people. So if you know the people,
Yeah, you can kind of figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jubilees goes one further to actually list boundary lines. Like you're going to get from here to here, east, and da-da-da-da-da. And we see a lot of that too, where it talks about, I remember one specific passage in the Old Testament where it talks about, don't defraud your neighbor, don't move those ancient boundary stones, and a lot of this. So Noah divides up the earth between the three boys, Shem, Ham, Japheth. And then the boys typically took that after Noah was gone, and then, or maybe even a little bit before, but either way, they divvied it up among their sons. And Canaan's big thing, and you can see this all through the Old Testament, Canaan was naughty because he took land that wasn't his.
Yeah.
And specifically, that whole area we talked about last time, a huge part of the northern portion of Israel, where you start getting into the land of Bashan, which would include Caesarea Philippi, Mount Hermon, and this is very clearly stated in there that this was where he went to. He went into, I think it talked about Lebanon, maybe, that whole area. And he did it knowing that he wasn't supposed to do it, but did it anyway.
Yeah.
So he's definitely being clearly naughty at this point. And that's why you see the David and a lot of the ancient or the old guys from the Old Testament are, when they go to take the promised land, they're basically taking the promised land back from Canaan.
Yeah.
So, which takes us all the way to the only other place in the Bible besides Genesis 6:4 that the Nephilim are even mentioned. The word Nephilim in most translations only appears twice in the Bible. And this is the other place, and that's Numbers 13:33. So to set the stage for this, they're getting ready to go into the promised land. And I think this is before the walking in the wilderness. Is that right?
Yeah.
Right. This is the first time they chicken out.
Yeah, sent in the spies and
so they send these guys in. They get to the promised land. Here they've escaped from Egypt, away from the Pharaoh. They have gone eastward, and they're getting ready to go to the land of milk and honey, so on and so forth, in the promised land. So Moses sends ahead a couple spies, and they go into this land to kind of scout it out. And they come back with a bunch of grapes, and they're basically saying, yeah, the land's fantastic. It's awesome. It's everything we ever dreamed of. But there's a problem.
Yeah, the son, what was it? The Nephilim and the sons of, they list off.
Yeah. So I have it here. It's Numbers 13:33. So here you go. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. So they're talking about going into the promised land, but here's the issue. And the issue is these dudes are basically like, yeah, it's fantastic, it's great and all, but we can't go because we cannot take these dudes out. They're monstrous huge, and they're way too strong.
Yeah.
And they wind up going throughout the whole camp, and they tell everybody, they get everybody basically thinking that they can't do this.
Yeah.
And so they balk, and God gets angry, and thus begins the 40 years in the desert.
Yes. The only two of them said they could take it, Joshua and Caleb.
Yeah. Who eventually wind up being the ones that do.
Yes.
After the 40 years.
Yes.
And they were pretty old by then.
Yeah, they were old men then.
Yeah. So that's the only other place in the Bible where the term giant, or the term Nephilim rather, is ever used.
Yeah.
So, but, and we can see here, there's an interesting thing in this scripture that says the descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim.
Yeah.
So, I just put something together that I've never thought of before. That's an interesting thing that they say that, because a woman and an angel, a watcher, when they mate, make the Nephilim.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
In this particular situation, they're saying that the descendants of Anak came from the Nephilim.
Yeah.
So that would be a Nephilim and something else.
Yeah.
Would that be a Nephilim and a Nephilim?
Could be.
A Nephilim and a woman?
Could be.
A Nephilim and an angel?
That's, you don't know who the parent is. We weren't there. We just know what we have now.
We did not uncover their nakedness.
No, we did not.
So the interesting thing, this kind of skips over to Jubilees because this is something we talked about earlier too, and I find this fascinating because I think it gets into exactly what we're talking about. And this is Jubilees 7, verses 21 and 22. And it says, "And they begat sons, the Nephilim, and they were all dissimilar, and they devoured one another. And the giants killed the Nephilim, and the Nephilim killed the Elo, and the Elo killed mankind, and man killed one another." Now, the interesting thing with this that we don't have in the Bible is, except for maybe that passage we just read, is it's clearly distinguishing different classes of these of these giants, of these entities. And there's really only a few combinations, and I listed them a second ago. We know that an angel and a woman, when they mate, created a Nephilim.
Yeah.
But we don't know what happens when an angel and a Nephilim mate.
Yeah.
No idea. We don't know what happens when a Nephilim and a Nephilim mate.
No.
And we don't know what happens when a woman and a Nephilim mate. So, but somewhere in here, you have to have at least two other kinds, right? Because you've got the Nephilim. We know how they're made. We have no idea because it says right here, "And the giants killed the Nephilim."
Yeah.
So how, obviously, whatever created a giant had to be even more powerful than a Nephilim. And based on what we read of the Nephilim, that is scary, terrifying.
Yeah. It goes back to the Clash of the Titans.
Yes.
I mean, the offspring killed. It's like always, trying to climb that hill to get better.
Right. And this fits, right? Because here we have this huge sin event, and it very clearly states in Genesis, maybe doesn't get into the details, but when you get to the point of the flood, obviously God, and we talked about this last week with the 500-year war.
Yeah.
Because the punishment was going to be, okay, you're going to you're going to watch all of your offspring kill each other off.
Yeah.
And with that, this went on for 500 years, right? And you're going to start watching these guys do each other in. Now, in 500 years' time, there had to be crossbreeding.
Yeah. Just because there was a war doesn't mean there was happy things going on.
Typically, when there's a war, there's always nothing but happy things going on.
Like in the middle of the Civil War, A1 was invented.
Is that right?
Yes.
It's an abstract. That's awesome. Oh, my goodness.
So, yes. People dying, somebody thought their steak needed to taste a little bit better.
Ketchup just won't do in these circumstances. We need to have something better. And I do love me some A1. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. So yeah, you have this crossbreeding, and it fits too, right? So here we have this huge event, and everything's spiraling out of control. This is going on. They're starting to war with each other. They're starting to kill each other, and there had to be a power grab.
Oh yeah,
right. I mean, isn't that? Do you think that's why the Watchers did this in the first place? I mean, it's power grab, right?
Oh yeah.
Like, we can be bigger than God. We just need to father children with these humans, and then bada bang, bada boom, we'll be better than God.
Yeah, I think taking it to like Greek mythology, like Zeus killing off Kronos, and then he became the god.
Yeah,
and
his father.
Yeah, Kronos was his father, so he kills him, and then now everybody knows who Zeus is, but not very many people know who Kronos is.
Yeah.
It's because
it's not really talked about.
Yeah.
I mean, not a lot. I mean, you get it, but everything focuses on Zeus and the family under him.
Yeah.
Typically.
And that's what this was going on. So we know the reason why we know God is because he wiped them out. He was like, no, he laid down the law. He didn't let anything happen.
Yeah.
But he
killing each other off.
Yeah. He gave him the judgment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they're chained up. Sorry about you. You get to watch, but
yeah.
And it also, one of the things we didn't talk about, maybe this is, you and I talked that, after the episode, we're kind of listening to it after the fact, and we're like, oh, we wish we'd have said, whatever. There's so much stuff we could get into there. But the interesting thing is where the angels were put, and it's really, and I think it's in Jubilees as well, but it talks about them being put in the center of the earth. That's kind of where Tartarus is. But side note, that we can come back to that. But It seems to me the only thing that would make sense, I would think, would be, I don't know, who made a giant? Because it clearly says right there, right, that so the giants are killing the Nephilim, right? And then the Nephil killed the Elo.
What's an Elo?
See, okay, so this makes sense too. This is what I think.
Would that be like, could that be chimeras?
It could be, but my thinking would be, okay, so we've got a Nephilim, right? A Nephilim and a woman. Because I would think that would make the watchers unhappy because it's like, oh no, it makes sense. Like you're a bastardized version of what we wanted to create.
Yeah.
So we're going to kill you off.
Yeah.
That it just makes how someone who's playing for power, it would make sense.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm just a theory. It's an interesting discussion, but it very clearly states here the problem is we ain't near the top of the food chain.
No.
Have you watched any of the? I think you did. I think you told me you had not watched Ancient Apocalypse.
No.
And I think I talked maybe about this.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about it.
I think I mentioned it last week too. But it's very interesting in there. So they found this huge cave system in Turkey. That's literally all this huge, elaborate, multi-story underground cave system that these people were clearly living in.
I've heard of this.
Yeah, and I forget the name of the place specifically, but I want to say everything's in Turkey. It's amazing.
Yeah.
I'd love to go there too. There's all kinds of crazy stuff there. But when I was watching the show, this particular thing came to my mind because I'm like, these people were hiding.
Yeah.
And where is the only safe place to go when you're being hunted by something like this?
Underground.
Yeah, dude. Like, I mean, if I'm 6 foot tall man, most of them back then weren't even that from what we can kind of tell. They were probably only 5.5 feet tall. I don't care. I'll give you a few inches and you're 6 feet tall. You and I are over 6 foot tall. We're 6'3", 6'4", whatever, 6'2".
Are we Nephilim?
I don't think so, Ben. I sure don't feel like one. I feel very small. But the interesting thing is, these things are like, even if there's because some of the argument is they're not necessarily thousands of feet tall. Maybe there's a transcription error, but
the offspring were, but not these guys.
Yeah, like even the offspring. Like let's even chop them down to a few 100 feet tall. I don't care. Yeah. Like I go in my front room and I even think about like Goliath or Og. Yeah. Og is another one.
14.
Like it talks about his bed, right? And we'll get into this here in a minute, but you get these indications that you mentioned earlier that Goliath may not even been that big. He might have been a tiny version.
Yeah.
And the dude was 9 feet tall. I don't take it as 6 feet tall. And maybe that's romanticized,
even in Amos, I think 9.3 or 3.9, it said that they were as tall as cedar trees. Now, a little cedar tree is 36 feet tall.
Yeah.
Now, if we want to go out west to where the redwoods are, those are 3,000 feet tall. So there's got to be anywhere
somewhere between there.
Yes. So these are big.
Yeah, and I think some of that too. It's so hard in the Bible to know. Like, is it? When is it being literal and when is it being figurative?
Yeah.
And, because they also said, we look like grasshoppers. Well, okay, you're not the size of a grasshopper. And there's another reference too where it talks about cedar trees where I don't know if they were necessarily as tall as cedar trees. Now I'm in the camp of like, I don't know. They could have been a couple thousand feet tall. How would we know? We weren't around. I'm definitely not in the camp that a lot of people get into when they start listening to this stuff and they're like, oh, that's so crazy.
Yeah.
Nothing can be 3,000 feet tall, but they're willing to believe in the flood story and they're willing to believe in that angels slept with women and made these entities. But there's something about the size where people completely balk and they're like, no, that's not possible.
Well, why was the ark so big?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Are you going for like maybe that we had something on there?
No, I mean like, it was made, it was God told him specifically how big to make it.
Oh, yeah.
And, if, let's say they were that tall, they wouldn't be able to fit.
Oh, fit in the ark?
Yeah.
And just rip it apart.
Yeah.
If you're 3,000 feet tall.
Yeah. I mean, what was the ark about? The size of a football field, something like that?
Yeah, I don't remember, but it's huge.
Like 300 feet by 70 feet, something like that.
Something like that. I mean, it's big. Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't think about, maybe I never thought about that, but do you think that they ever found the ark? I know this is a complete side story here, but it's a fun one, so why not? It's Tinfoil Hat Club. We can do whatever we want. Let's get foily.
Well,
found it and covered it up.
My mother-in-law knows a guy that was flying over there, and supposedly he was the one. They found it. This guy did, and he was from. This is the story. He was flying over there, and they found it. And I'm not saying he was the one, but they saw something, and then took pictures or something, gave to somebody. I don't know if that's the story that I have had from.
Yeah,
but as far as I know they've said they've found it and things like that.
There's some interesting stuff on that.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense because I think that there definitely has been an active attempt to suppress biblical history.
Oh, yeah.
Like in findings. Because and more that leaks out, more and more is confirmed that the Bible is accurate. Which makes sense. I mean, we believe the Bible. We're Christians. I mean, I don't take the Bible and go, well, this part's good and this part's not. And, I think that makes you a pretty hypocritical Christian when you do that because you're just justifying your own sin in your life.
Yeah.
Point blank, there it is. But I think there's some interesting stories from the ark being found and giants being found. So that kind of leads us to almost part 2 of this story. So you go and you have... Go ahead.
I was going to bring in a theory of Ben, but that's okay.
No. I want to hear a theory. I want to hear all theories of Ben. Go, man.
Well, this is the other ark, the Ark of the Covenant.
Oh, okay.
This is Ben's theory.
That you mean gone missing?
Yes, this is my theory. You can say I'm wrong, I'm dumb, I'm crazy. Why'd you even think of something? Why would you put that in our heads?
I would never do that.
But when Christ was crucified, to fulfill the law, his blood had to be sprinkled on the Ark of the Covenant. That's what they did. They sprinkled it on the Ark and after they sacrificed. And so that means somewhere around his crucifixion would have been the Ark.
Who is the name of the guy who claimed that he found the Ark and it was actually underneath?
Oh, really?
Where Christ was crucified.
Are you serious?
His name was Ron. I do not recall. Yeah, that's kind of an interesting story.
I didn't know that.
You haven't heard this?
No.
So,
sorry. Wow.
Now, boom, boom. There you go. So, allegedly, the blood ran down, and according to this story, and I'll have to find the name of the guy, and I wish I could come up with it right now off the cuff, but I can't. Went underneath there, and underneath Golgotha, where Christ was crucified, there he found the ark. Like, he couldn't really get to it, but he could tell that's what it was. And the blood had been dripped down, and he actually was able to get a sample of the blood.
Oh, wow. And
had it analyzed. And it had, I'm going to get this wrong, but I mean, it's in the vein of what the story is. When the blood came back, the analysis for the blood came back, it had an extra chromosome on the male side. Like normal female, normal male, but then it had an extra chromosome on the one side. Or only had one chromosome I forget which one. So I'm probably butchering that, but wow. I wish I could come up with a name. We'll have to look that up after
that is crazy.
We get done. But yeah.
I just thought about that. I mean,
no. This dude went around, of course he got labeled a quack. I mean, you can only imagine, right?
Yeah.
You're going to get targeted. Even if it's all true, you're going to get targeted. You're going to get made out to be a lunatic. Just like even, with Graham Hancock, who did Ancient Apocalypse. Here Graham is coming at it from the standpoint of agnosticism. He's not coming at this from any particular religious standpoint. Yet he's saying, look, all of the evidence points to the fact that we had a global flood.
Yeah.
Which kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier, whereas the localized flood thing doesn't hold up. We've got all around the world stories of a global flood in almost every civilization out there. And then after the flood or right after the flood, you get these little variants on what happened after. It's like little flavors of whatever the truth really is, which we believe to be the Bible. But, when you dare challenge the scientific community, like Hancock, who again isn't coming at it from any particular angle, he's just challenging the science, right? He's going around to these sites like Göbekli Tepe, or the place that I talked about, and the other place in Turkey that I talked about, or Karen Tepe, again, I think in Turkey. They're all in Turkey. Huh. And you're going to these locations and you're like, they had advanced celestial knowledge that we can't understand. They had advanced building knowledge that we can't understand. They had advanced spiritual knowledge of some kind that they were worshiping, something that we didn't understand. And based on the time frame, we've got these people marked as these basic primitive hunter-gatherers. And this is just, there's no way that holds water anymore.
Well, I can't never pronounce the first one. Göbekli Tepe.
Oh, Göbekli Tepe?
Yes. Isn't that supposedly the oldest settlement?
Yes. I believe that is the oldest site that they have ever uncovered.
Yeah,
it's like only 20% of it so far. Like there's like 80% buried underground.
Yeah, and that would have had to been where they came down. Close to it.
Yeah, when you look, because the other thing too that you need to understand is, we say Mount Hermon, but that's kind of a little bit of a misnomer. It's kind of like Mount Ararat.
Yeah.
It's the mountains of Ararat.
Yeah.
It's the mountains of Hermon.
Yeah.
Don't know where the tallest peak is. I think actually in Hermon, Mount Hermon itself, inside of the chain, is the tallest mountain. Yeah, but I think Ararat. Actually, you know what? One of the books, I think it might have been Jubilee. It had to be Jubilees because Enoch doesn't get into post-flood. Jubilees talks about specifically where on the mountain the ark landed. And it talks about the mountains of Ararat, but it says it landed specifically here in this spot.
Yeah, that's so if they come down, it would make sense that would have been the oldest settlement of any kind. Like people, but not people, but you see a bunch of people coming down, hey, take me to your leader or what have you,
Right.
They're going to settle there.
Yeah, because what they're finding is they're finding these gigantically huge stone, like Stonehenge, right? But on steroids.
Yeah.
That there's no way that quote unquote primitive man would have been able to do. And I watched the show having all this knowledge of reading, Enoch, and I think I'd gotten into Jubilees a little bit at that point, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. I can explain all of this. It makes so much sense.
Yeah.
I think the Nephilim built a lot of this stuff.
Oh yeah, they did. They I mean, they were big.
Yeah, like you said, a Lego.
Yeah.
Like you said, made the comment, it's like picking up a Lego.
Yeah.
It's just like for us, I'm like to an ant. They can't lift up a stone, like a pebble.
Yeah.
They don't have the strength to do that. We reach down and pick it up like nothing.
Yeah, I was just thinking, oh, they have a cave troll. Oh, they have a Nephilim.
But we laugh about that stuff. But that's where that comes from. It has to.
I know.
Where do we come up with all this stuff? We talked about this last week too. Like all of this stuff comes from these stories.
Yeah, they're true.
It has to be. It doesn't make any sense otherwise. I think all of the things we talk about, and we got into the Egyptian, mythology and all that stuff too, and the hieroglyphs, and you got bird creatures and dog men, and you said that the
lion men of Moab.
We talked about that. So I think that, here you go 500 years with this stuff, and that there was power plays in there.
Oh, yeah.
There had to be, dude. And they're going to clamor over one another. Like mankind's like an afterthought. It probably was more of a like, who's going to rule man? No, we're going to rule man.
Oh, yeah.
We're the ones that started all this. Oh, no, you're not. It's funny how it says nobody killed the Watchers, but I think that makes sense because they already been bound up by this point.
Yeah, they were gone. They were like, Mom and Dad's gone. We can do whatever we want.
Yeah. But I think somebody started crossbreeding, and that's why the Nephilim killed these Elo. And it's actually ELJO, so I could be completely butchering that.
It was, doesn't Jubilees get into how they did it? A little.
I don't remember that part. Could be. Wouldn't surprise me. I don't remember that part.
I thought they would separate a group of animals and then put another group with them and then put some people with them. And
could have gotten into it later. I'm not as strong in the later part of Jubilees. I kind of was, because I was so focused on the giant stuff at the time, and even still like today, I kind of got to that part, and I kind of was like, when we started getting into Abraham, I'm like, I read that story. But it's funny because there are little snippets here and there where it talks about, even in the Abraham portions of things, where it talks about this.
Yeah,
it's kind of
the lot he bought for Sarah was from that guy's name means fawn like.
So he's like a hybrid.
Yeah, he was a hybrid.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Isn't that Ephraim? I think
I do remember vaguely reading about this week. I read so much stuff this week.
And his name was fawn like, and he was a Canaanite.
Now there, go figure. Dirty Canaanites.
I know. I mean, and you just, I don't think it's fairy tales. I think it was real, and we've lost.
Mm-hmm.
We're so used to just whatever, it's fake.
Yeah, we toss it out. But I think we've been conditioned to be that way.
Yeah. We even question things, whether it's real or not, when we watch it.
Or it happens to us.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something, it's definitely part of our conditioning. And again, too, I think, like you and I talked about, this all goes back to spiritual warfare. All of it.
Yeah.
It all ties back to spiritual warfare. All of this is a power play for the throne. We talk about Game of Thrones. Well, this is the ultimate Game of Thrones. And it does not, it plays out sometimes in our physical realm.
Yeah.
But it's really a war that is taking place more in the spiritual realm that just plays out here, and we get used as pawns in the middle.
Kind of like jumping ahead to the Tower of Babel. When they were building it, they were trying to get into heaven.
Absolutely.
They broke themselves off into 3 camps, and God was like, I don't think so.
Some of the math, have you seen some of the math on that too in Jubilees?
What was it? It would have been like 8,000 feet tall.
Yeah. So the first thing, yeah, somewhere in there. I did the math the other day. I don't remember what it came out to, but it's like way tall. I'm like, Burj Khalifa is like, funny. It's a cute little, look at your cute little building.
I know.
And I started to think, I'm like, dude, yeah, but how could they breathe? But then you go look it up, and like, people are climbing Everest with no stuff. And the other thing too is that area is well below sea level.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, Dead Sea. That's why it's called the Dead Sea.
Yeah.
It's like the lowest place on the earth.
And the base would have been between 100 and 200 miles.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And you can go read the math and kind of do the math or a little whatever.
What did it say? If they dropped a brick, they grief. But if somebody would die, oh well.
Oh, whoops.
Yeah.
Yeah, that, and here you go, because this ties back to what we talked about earlier too. You got Nimrod.
Yep.
And the Bible goes out of its way to make note of Nimrod, and it uses a lot of the same language that we see in Genesis 6:4. I think he was a Nephilim. The argument could be made that he wasn't, but I think that he was, and he was definitely in charge of Babylon, because it makes no bones about it that he was the one that formed Babylon and a couple other places. I don't remember off the top of my head, but Babylon, Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
Here you go. And then things just get worse from there.
Oh, yeah.
We scatter, we confuse and confound language. I think Hebrew was lost somewhere, and it may be Jubilees as well, where it talks about Hebrew was lost, but then God taught or had the angels reteach Abraham Hebrew, I think.
Could have been.
So, yeah, and Hebrew's fascinating. For any of you that have not ever looked into Hebrew, and this is just a side note, and goes into the translation thing that we've already talked about a couple different things. Go look up a video of what Bereshit means. And that is beginning in Hebrew, and that will blow your tater tot. Have you ever seen this?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating because Hebrew, unlike English is horrible. It's at best two-dimensional.
Yeah.
It's really not good. Hebrew is like at least three-dimensional, but more of like a four-dimensional language because you have a number, a symbol, a character, and a meaning for that character.
Yeah.
And when you phonetically spell out in Hebrew the word Bereshit, which is beginning, it literally points to Christ.
Yeah. You know what Yahuwah means?
Oh, like Joshua? Yeshua?
No, what it actually means.
No.
Like God's name Yahuwah, or however, Yahweh, or however.
Yahweh.
Means, I'm probably going to butcher it, but it means, behold hand, behold nail.
Really?
Yes.
It's like when you go look to and you combine the Adam all the way to Noah.
Yeah.
You put all their names together. It's basically pointing to Christ as well. And from the beginning, Ben.
Yeah, and then you do the bad guys and it points to everything that's terrible and what they've did.
Yep. Really?
Yes.
I've never done that side.
Yes.
That's kind of a fun dive.
It's like a mirror image of the two. Like how we said last week, the devil will do anything to turn anything good over.
Yep. God does the same thing and he's way better at it.
Yes, he is.
I always love the fact that, the devil's number is
666.
And what's the God's number?
7.
7, right? I always love that because it's like I'm the creator of the universe. My number could be whatever, but I only need to be one better than you.
I know.
Yeah, I always thought that was kind of fun.
I know.
Yeah, God's the master of taking things for evil and turning them into good. But and I think any of us, even if you're not, necessarily a Christian, but have all had some experience in our life where God was involved. I just believe that. And I know for me, when I look at it, there are things that God would provide for, or provide solutions to problems, or provide things that were set up so far in hindsight, like way back. And it will not only be a solution for me, but a solution for other people. Or it'll be a multi-dimensional solution. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You ever had that happen? I'm pretty sure every Christian's had it happen. But it just kind of, what it does is it just kind of peeks the door open a little bit and lets you see how God actually works and how we as humans are so one plane. We think linearly. We don't think multi-dimensionally. We don't think anythingly. And how God is just so awesome that he thinks on multiple levels, multiple dimensions, multiple timelines. And it's just, we're so minuscule in our thoughts.
I was talking to my wife at church this morning, and I was telling her story. I won't get into the story, but it was just a neat story. And I said, it's kind of funny how we're all connected, but we pay no attention.
Yeah.
We're always looking down. We're never looking up to see what's going on. I said, that's everyday life. That's where we are stuck in our lives. Like, I'm always thinking about what's going on in my life every day. I'm like,
oh yeah.
And and I'm not thinking about what this person's doing and how it can affect me, whether it's good or bad.
Yeah.
Somebody that's driving next to you. Mm-hmm. And we need to, like you said, it's everything.
We miss so much. We miss so much of God's grandeur because we're so focused on ourselves and our problems.
Yeah.
And our lives and our busy lives, and how are we going to pay the rent this month, or how are we going to buy a car for this kid, or how are we going to replace a job, or all these things, or am I going to be able to keep my house, and all these things that we worry about as human beings. But at the end of the day, we miss so much because of that. And it's kind of sad. And I think that's one of the things that we are constantly like wet clay trying to get molded into better Christians and better people for God, because when we can start to tie into that stuff and we listen, because I think that's one of the things that gets better is your ears get cleaned out.
Yeah.
Your receptors get better. Like I've kind of said a couple times here recently that, like I'm a much better Christian now than I was 3-4 years ago. I'm much more useful. I wasn't a bad Christian. I wasn't a useful one.
Yeah.
Now I'm a useful Christian because I want to do things. I want to know more about God and I want to do more things. That's why we're doing this, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of a fascinating thing because, he takes things that are abstract that we have curiosities in, like the Nephilim and giants and all this stuff, but it's biblical based, right? It's not like it's not in there.
Yeah.
I know we've referenced extra biblical texts a lot in his first 2 episodes, but it ain't like it's not in the Bible.
Yeah, no.
I mean, you've got Goliath, right?
Yeah.
He was a giant. Okay. How do you get around that? Well, he was only 6 foot some tall. Okay. What about all the other giants?
Yeah. His 5 brothers. He had brothers too.
Yeah. It talks about one of the brothers was at least one of the brothers getting offed. I forget who killed him.
One of David's mighty men.
He was going to kill David.
Yeah.
He was going to kill David for payback, and one of his dudes took him out. I remember that story. I forget his name. You wrote it down earlier. Like I said, I read a lot of stuff this week. I probably did this week what you did last week. We switched roles. I kind of came in all studied or whatever, but I
listened to a lot of music.
Cooked the books, and you listen to a lot of music, so that's kind of awesome. But we kind of move forward to, back on the topic, I guess, and we spin forward to today. And this is the $1 million question. Do you think giants still exist?
Today, yes.
Yes,
I do.
You do.
Yes. But there's always a but.
Yeah.
Where are they? That's the question. Mm-hmm. And I don't think a giant has to be somebody that's tall.
Interesting.
Like with the cone heads in down south.
I'm not familiar with this.
They're cone shaped.
They literally have canonical shaped heads.
Yes.
Really?
L.A. Marzulli does a lot of study with that, and so does Dr. Jed Burton's been down there quite a bit. And
which some of these guys, as far as you and I've talked.
Yeah.
I'm going to be the crazy person and reach out to some of these dudes to see if they'll come on the show. I think this is right up their alley, so maybe I can.
It would be cool.
God would do some cool stuff there, but
they research this, and they say that they bored their heads but they didn't. I mean, this is recent. I would say within the past 500 years, maybe later, but their brain capacity was even more.
And we only use how much of our brain?
Yeah, I mean that's
But when your brain's a lot bigger and you use 10% of that, I guess it's.
Yeah, and then a couple years ago, I saw this whole family. And the news did this story on this whole family. They all had 6 fingers and 6 toes. The whole family did.
Which is, again, biblical.
Yes.
Because wasn't Goliath? Yeah, Goliath was the one. He had 6 fingers and 6 toes, right?
I do believe so.
Yeah.
And then all the Indians out west that talked about the giants that they fought.
Yeah, as I was digging this week and getting into some stuff.
What is it, the cave in Nevada?
Oh, we've got so much stuff just in this country.
I know.
It's crazy.
And Abraham Lincoln even talked about the giants.
I think I heard this too.
Where he was talking about Niagara, and he said, even the great giants have laid eyes on Niagara or something like that. He's giving a speech.
Really? That's kind of fascinating too. Yeah, we have a ton of stuff in this country. I want to go over to Serpent Mound over in Ohio.
I had a friend just come back from there.
Yeah. So just to explain for those of you that may not know, so this is, and there's a ton of stuff like this.
Yes.
It's not the only one. But over in Ohio, there's a fairly famous, it's literally a mound, but it's not like a mound of dirt or a mound of ground, just random. It's literally been deliberately shaped in the shape of a serpent.
Yep.
And I want to say the curves of the serpent and the head of the serpent line up with on the solstices, maybe. You heard this part?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, I think, and it's in, this is another one too, when you go watch Ancient Apocalypse, it's in there. And they wouldn't let him in.
Really?
They would not let Graham Hancock in there. With a Netflix crew, would not let him into film. So they flew a drone. Which is kind of better because
you get to see it.
You get to see it better, right? Because it's huge. But yeah, when you do the math on this, it all lines up celestially with like on the solstices. And this is very common. Like when you go to Karen Tepe, you go to all these places, Göbekli Tepe, all these ancient sites, they all have the same thing in common, which is when they were designed and built for lining up perfectly celestially to bodies in the sky or on the solstices or things like this. There was definitely some kind of celestial worship session going on.
Yeah.
Which makes sense because you got all this watcher knowledge, right? There's kind of a side shoot to this conversation, and it doesn't happen on Canaan's side or Ham's side of the coin. It actually happens on Shem's side of the coin. And Christ eventually was descendant from Shem's side of the coin. So you've got Shem. Was he the baby or the middle? No, he wasn't the middle. Ham was the middle child. It's kind of fuzzy when you go read it, who was the oldest and who is the youngest. Because it says Shem, Ham, and Japheth, but I don't think that was necessarily the birth order. Have you ever looked into this?
No, I haven't. I always figured,
Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Yeah. So 1, 2, 3. And it makes sense. Ham's the middle child. It's always the middle child. That's the problem.
I was the baby.
Or the baby. The baby's the problem.
I was the baby.
I was the baby too. So we're going to pin it on the middle child, but the middle child's probably the best one because they don't get no love. They get no love. So it's kind of funny though when you dig into this. There is a discrepancy in the account of the lineage in Genesis, and it's repeated in Chronicles, and then Luke provides a very detailed line for Christ. Tracing all the way back to Adam.
Yeah.
And there's a person missing who in the Genesis account and the First Chronicles account, there is a person missing back right after Noah who is in the account, in Luke's account. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah.
And that person is a guy by the name of Kainem. It was Kainem. Yeah. It's spelled differently depending on what you're looking at. If you're looking at Genesis if you're looking in Luke, or if you're looking in like Jubilees.
Yeah.
Kainem. Now, you know what Kainem did. Did you want to talk about this?
Yeah.
Okay. So just fill everybody in. It's very interesting and ironic that this is the person that's missing because this is a huge thing. And this ties into, I think, even today. What you find after we have started to repopulate the earth, on Shem's side, one of his sons was Arphaxad or Arphaxad, depending on how you read the name, depending on what translation you have, and then depending on whether you're looking in, the Bible or you're looking in Jubilees. He has a son named Kainem. And sometimes it's spelled with a C. It's Kainan or Kainem. Sometimes it's spelled with an A or an N or an M, but it's the same person because you can see the lineage history. In Genesis and in Chronicles, he is completely skipped over and it goes right to Shelah, who actually was Kainan's son.
Yeah.
And that's stated properly in Luke, but in the other two, it's wrong. But here's why this is important, and I found this to be very ironic that he was left out. And it's because he was the one who found after the flood, it specifically states in Jubilees, that he found watcher tablets that specifically had knowledge on them of celestial nature. And it says he sinned owing to it. He wrote it down, he recorded it, and he sinned owing to it, and he deliberately did not tell Noah.
Yep.
And his introduction was that he was going to go seize for himself a city, which is kind of a jerky way to be introduced, right? It's like, I don't want to make my own stuff. I'm just going to steal other people's. Yeah. So he's kind of a slime ball. It's kind of what you have. But it's interesting in my Bible anyway, a study Bible, that down in the liner notes, kind of smash between the study portion and the regular text, it actually states in there that in both Chronicles and Genesis, that in the Greek translations, he's in there.
Yeah.
But in our translation, he's not.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Well, they wanted to write him out.
Now, the $1 million question, what you just said was, who is they?
That's another show.
It's a whole nother show. Yeah, for sure.
You could go a lot of different directions.
You could. I don't know. I mean, that's an open-ended question.
I mean, because usually in the Bible, it gives you why. I mean,
yeah, just to be omitted
Yeah.
is strange. And obviously it's in the Greek, right? So
yeah.
we got some modern translational problems. The other thing too, isn't there is it a verse in Matthew that's completely missing in a lot of translations?
I think so. Well, I think Dan is missing in Revelation. The tribe of Dan.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You know where that's at? Do you know where Dan is?
Who knows?
I do.
I'm just just joking. Because it's, I mean, I don't want to get too much into this, like the they.
Yeah, right.
But
we'll get that on episode 50.
yeah, it's like we said last week. Why is it now, like I would say in the past 7-8 years, all of like this kind of
knowledge,
this kind of discussion is happening now? Mm-hmm. Why is that? Obviously somebody was hiding things.
I think so.
And like you said, episode 50, we're just building up.
That way we don't make all of our audience angry. We got to gain some audience before we tick them all off and start putting blame on people. I'll just go for it. I think a huge part of it is the Catholic Church. I think so. But I think it goes back further than that.
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting to me that it's in the Greek, but it didn't make it into translation. So that has to be more modern. The way that I would kind of detectively pull that apart, right?
Well, just how Enoch used to be in the Bible, and it's not anymore.
Yeah, I've dug into that a lot because that was kind of the natural extension of, step one, read the book. Oh my gosh, mind is blown. Step two is, okay, take a breath, take a step back, and see if I can read scripture. Because if I can punch holes in this with scripture, it's no bueno, right?
Yeah.
Do not cross go, do not collect $200, stop here. And I couldn't do that. It just reinforced scripture, and scripture reinforced Enoch, and here we go with this circular loop, and everything makes sense, and nothing is in conflict. And then as I've read more and more in Jubilees, I've reread Jubilees, and there were things that I thought were in conflict that are not in conflict. I'm still digging into that one, but it's just fascinating. But when I dug into it, and I haven't even gotten to the bottom of the black hole yet, because it is a deep dive. It seems what I've picked up, this goes all the way back to the Maccabean War.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And in the Maccabean Wars, so you're talking, 200 years before Christ, 150 years before Christ?
Somewhere around there.
Somewhere in that time frame. But what I've put together so far, and by no means am I ready to plant my flag here and say, this is it, I'm done. Through that event, and this was the Jews throwing out the Greeks, I do believe.
Yeah.
What you have from coming out of that is you have the Romans coming in, and as part of a deal to help kind of protect them, I think, or to get into the mix politically, the agreement was, we're just going to help oversee things, but not rule you. But ultimately what came from that was the Pharisees come to power.
Yeah.
And what the Pharisees did is they threw out all of the Aaronic priests, the Levite priests, who were in charge of all the knowledge, and they fled east. And by all accounts, from what I've dug into so far, they fled to Qumran, which is why we have all of the scrolls that we have.
Yeah.
And then also, you have a vast majority of the Catholic Apocrypha was found at in Qumran.
Yeah.
But you ain't got Maccabees in there.
No.
Because they did not have a favorable view of Maccabees, because they felt like it was kind of one of those that history's written by the victor kind of a thing.
Yeah, it was.
But it seems like to me when that happened, the Pharisees did not like anything that talked about the Messiah. If it talked about the Messiah at all, it's out.
Yeah.
Unless it's Torah, things that we already know from long ago. Is this the same thing have you dug into this at all?
Like with the reason why he was left out, or just
the whole why Enoch didn't make the cut? Because I think by the time the Catholics kind of came into the scene, he was already that book would already pretty much gone.
See, I take it one step further.
Go. I'm curious.
I think of why the devil doesn't want it in. Why would he quote unquote push something so hard not to have it in?
I have a feeling this is going to go back to our first conversation, Ben. Mount Hermon?
Yeah, I mean, he's the loser.
Of course.
Nobody wants to look bad.
No. I think that's
it's just like you said, it's a big circle.
Yeah. But it all goes back to our first conversation.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like you said, they didn't want it in. Well, who was in charge of it? Where were their hearts? What were they being led by?
Yeah.
And
clearly the Pharisees were not being led by good things.
No, they were not.
Yeah. And it's just the thing. There's kind of two elements to it, right? You always know the devil's behind it. That's the spiritual warfare stuff.
Yeah. Right? I'll be honest. I always go straight spiritual warfare. That's me, because I'm always wondering what's out there to get me.
Yeah, I agree. I just, the one thing for me to try to figure it out and go one step further and go, okay, who was the pawn?
Yeah.
Who did Satan use to get rid of this? Because that's a huge black eye, right?
Yeah.
Because if we can get people to turn away from Christ, hey, that's fantastic. Because I couldn't do him in the way I wanted to do him in, and when I did him in, I didn't realize what I did, and oh my gosh, I screwed up. And let me get rid of the screw up, and let me get rid of the fact that when you put your finger in my face and gave me the spiritual bird on Mount Hermon, it's not flattering, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that came out of that whole thing, and this is something we didn't necessarily get into last week, and again, this is another discussion, but I think the Catholic Church was used. I think because really when you go back, Catholicism is the root of what we have as modern day Christianity.
Yeah.
In almost every instance. And I think coming out of that crucifixion and how much of a black eye that was for the devil, I think the mission then became, okay, now my new target is your followers. I'm going to take this new church that you just started, and I'm going to just twist it and mangle it beyond belief, and I'm going to just target it 100% of my effort. And you can see that happening in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And I think it started with Nero. We have Nero martyring Paul, martyring Peter. And then it was like, okay, I'm going to take this church and I'm just going to completely twist it around until it's unrecognizable.
Yep.
And that happens over thousands of years.
Yeah.
You can see it early on, but it got really bad after a couple 100 years. And I think that became the mission for Satan.
Yeah.
That's the way I've always read it. I think some of what the Catholic Church had, because I went back to the Council of Nicaea, and I've really dug into this a lot because I wanted to find out, okay, when did this book get the boot? And I've tracked it all the way back to, it seems like it more than likely got booted out back in the Maccabean War period, coming out of that, when the priests were flushed out of the temple and sent over to Qumran. That's like an interesting thing about John the Baptist. We see him eating locusts and honey, and we think, oh, he's a hobo.
Yeah.
He's wearing sackcloth, he's eating locusts and honey, and he's a hobo. No, he's not. He's a trained Levite priest.
Yeah.
And he's following the law of Moses.
Yep.
His father, I think it even talks about this in the Bible, his father was a Levite priest.
Yeah, he would go to the temple and serve.
Yeah.
But then he like all men kind of laughed and poked fun at God, and God said, "You're not going to talk."
Boop. No more talkie. Yeah. So here you have this, right? So the kind of, the modern Christian just sees John the Baptist, especially like when you watch The Chosen, he comes across like a little bit of a loony, or kind of, but he comes across that way in the Bible too. But when you dig into the lineage there, that's why he's not crazy. He's doing this because he's a trained Levite priest.
He's staying clean.
He's staying clean, right? He's staying within the law of Moses, which is a rough law, really rough law.
But I will, if you're a follower, it says, "If you love me, you'll keep my commandments."
Keep my commands. That's right. Thankfully, it got more simplistic over time, and we're not bound by a lot of that stuff anymore because we stunk so bad at it. But we come full circle back to the giant thing, right? And we kind of got sidetracked there, but it was good sidetrack, like it always is. But we talk about the modern day stuff. One of the things that I got onto this week that I think is fascinating is the Kandahar giant story.
Yes.
You believe that to be true?
I do.
I think there's other accounts from those guys over there as well.
I mean, why doubt it?
It just doesn't make any sense. It's kind of like, these military pilots and airline pilots seeing, UAPs, whatever we're calling them these days, which is hilarious. And then we're going to get into this too. Obviously, it's a huge topic.
Wait, is that what they want to be called now?
Is that how they identify? Did the aliens tell us this? That's how they want to identify. I want to identify as a UAP, please.
We had to look up what that meant.
It's not aerial anymore either. They've changed the A now so that it like fits land, sea, air.
Yeah.
I guess that's what the government does.
Wouldn't that be a Marine, land, sea, and air?
Right? The few, the proud, the alien Marine.
That's right.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So you have, but with that, you have people that are not lunatics seeing this stuff.
Yeah.
They're lucid. They're credible. I mean, we're trusting this dude to fly a however many $1 million jet. I don't think he's losing his cheese ain't slid off his cracker.
Yeah.
These are military guys, right? But you have the same exact thing with the giant. Yep. These are military guys that, why would they make this stuff up?
Yeah.
They're not getting anything from it.
There was, watched a video similar, but it happened like in Appalachia.
Oh yeah. Well, there was, you get into Bigfoot and all kinds of stuff.
It was something like that, but it was similar. But the Kandahar giant was way bigger.
Yeah, and I think it's important because I thought about this for today's show too. And I wanted to make this distinction. I do not believe this to be a case of like what we would know as like Andre the Giant. Now we're touching on your realm, right?
Yeah.
Acromegaly. This is not acromegaly. This is literally a dude that is however many feet tall. And I think in the case of the Kandahar giant, they were talking he was 12 to 15 feet
I think
tall.
they said he had red hair.
Red hair.
6 fingers.
Yeah.
He fit the description.
Yeah, and it talks about it in here. They were all dissimilar. I read somewhere else where there was another one. I don't even know where I read this, where they had like 12 fingers and 12 toes. I don't know, crazy stuff. But they're all weird because they're not pure blood. But yeah, I mean, so this dude literally kills, I forget how many of them he killed. He killed one dude with a spear.
Yeah.
And I guess it just he looked like a sardine on the end of the spear, I guess.
Yeah.
And it took like however many. It was like a squad of guys. Yeah. Sustained gunfire of like 30 seconds to take this thing down. And then the chopper comes in and they load this thing up and it just goes away.
Yep.
Now that's an interesting discussion.
I wonder if the Smithsonian came in and got it.
Supposedly, right? Well, the Smithsonian is a government-run agency, right? A government-run museum, right? I think this goes back to our first discussion, and I think that these things are happening. I think these encounters are real.
Yes.
And I think that they have happened, because this is not the only encounter. No. There was another one I saw where the dude had on night vision, and he looks up on the hill. Have you seen this one? And he sees the stuff, like the night vision they've got is like good stuff. right? It ain't like we have. It's good
Yeah.
stuff. Like this thing was like even more cutting edge, like brand new. And he's playing with this thing one night, trying to figure out how to get it to work. And he looks up on the hill, and it's a ways off, and he sees this thing up there, and he can tell it's got a goat. He's got a goat with him, and he can see the fire because he can kind of flip through the different, settings on these, goggles or whatever. And he can see infrared. He can see all these different spectrums. And so he can tell how big this thing is. And he said the goat looked like, a bunny rabbit next to this thing.
Yeah.
And it's moving crazy fast, but not like trying to move fast. It's moving, it's covering great distance because of its size.
Yeah.
Not because it's fast. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And I guess, he didn't get any pictures of it, which anytime that anybody has that happen, of course, they're like, okay, that's a made up story because you didn't get any pictures. But I guess the thing actually had a way to record and get pictures, but he's playing with it. So he didn't know at the time. So you have that story. That's kind of a fascinating one. Then there's been others. And then the giant bones, like you go back into the newspapers from like,
yeah,
the 1900s, and there's
like every week.
Yeah, all the time.
Digging up bones.
Yeah, here in America.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Around the mounds.
Yep, all around these mounds. Yeah. Crazy. There's some stuff here for sure. But I think that they scooped this thing up and hushed it. And I've heard the interview, or I've heard part of the interview with the helicopter pilot or whatever. And I don't remember where he said they took it.
Thought it was right, Pat.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, because when you go back to the UFO thing, that was like the haven where they took all of the stuff.
But isn't that like a museum now?
There's still a base.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And that still has a crazy top secret clearance on that base. Funny enough, I have a guy that is a buddy of mine whose uncle was a colonel, and he was in charge of that base. Yeah, kind of fascinating.
Interesting.
Yeah, he had to have clearance out the wazoo. So, but yeah, you've got the museum there, and then you've got the base. But supposedly that's where all the Roswell stuff wound up.
Interesting.
That's where they took the Roswell stuff. Eventually, it all
the
went
weather
right
balloon.
Pat. Yeah, the weather balloon.
Well, now what is it? The lab in Los Alamos, with all this experiments that goes on there too.
Yeah, have you ever listened to the Bob Lazar stuff? I know we're kind of drifting into the aliens. Maybe that's our next show. But
no, but I was more thinking chimeras there.
You're saying maybe creating them?
Yeah.
Oh, I totally think. I think that's what they're doing. I think, again, as it was in the days of Noah.
Yes.
I think that is exactly what we're talking about. I think they snatched up that giant. They want that DNA.
Oh, yeah.
You ever heard the story, too, that when we were over in the Middle East, like in Iraq, that they were running spec ops into the museums and grabbing stuff?
Yeah.
You heard that story?
Stealing stuff. And it was all about reanimating the dead, too. A lot of the stuff that was taken. And supposedly they found Nimrod.
I've heard this.
And they said he was very well preserved, which was interesting.
Yeah.
Because if you go through the account of, what is it, in Jubilees, where, I think it's later in Jubilees, that where Esau kills Nimrod.
Oh, I have to go read this.
Or is it Jasher? The reason why he sold his birthright was two alpha males hunting. He comes across Nimrod, kills him, runs back to the house. It never explains why he said, "I'm already a dead man." Never explains that, why he would sell his birthright for a bowl of soup. I mean, it's Genesis says, bloop.
Yeah, he just gave it to him for stew.
Yeah. And he give me, because he said, "I'm already a dead man."
I'll have to go back and read that. Do the timelines match up for that?
Pretty close. because
You got to really do some digging in the timelines in Genesis.
I know. And I mean,
There's a
it's
lot there.
all kind of, I would say, it matches up pretty well.
It doesn't. I don't think it talks
Because it
about
said Nimrod would have been about 214.
Well, we know that at least in the case, the only one that I remember when you get to that far in Genesis that it's talking about how long they lived was Abraham.
Yeah.
And how long was Abraham? Like 400 or 500?
He lived, I think, about 180.
I thought it was longer than that. I could be wrong. But the thing that I'm getting to there is either way, you still have extreme longevity compared to what we have now.
Yeah.
So they hadn't scaled down yet to the 120 years. That's another thing that makes me think that God was talking about our lifespans slowly dwindling over time.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a fascinating thing too, because I think one of the things that I've always taken out of the story of the flood and the lifespan thing, I think the earth that we see today too is a much decayed version of what it originally was.
Oh, yeah.
You think so too?
Yeah. I mean, everything in nature is in a minor chord.
What do you mean by that?
Like birds sing in a minor chord. They're not a major, so they're sad.
Is that true?
Yep.
Get out of here.
The wind is in a minor chord.
Get out of here. Are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I've never heard this before.
Yeah. I think David Jeremiah did a whole series on that.
Wow.
Of why, even though Christ has, essentially, died and resurrected, but we're still in a dead, decaying earth. It's not been renewed yet.
Yeah, and that's, to me, that speaks to God's grandeur and majesty even more, because there are some things that we see in this world that are just unbelievably beautiful.
Yeah.
And to think that that's a fragment of what it was originally.
Yeah.
It's kind of a mind job.
And we still have ticks, mosquitoes, and flies.
Do you think they had that stuff before the flood?
No.
I don't think so. There's a strong...
I think it's a curse.
Yeah.
For what Adam did. This is just...
So that maybe before the flood, but not before Eden.
Yeah.
Before the sin in the garden.
Yeah. And thistles and thorns and
right. You'll thistles and thorns. You'll have to make your living and work the ground.
Yeah.
And, thistles and thorns that'll produce for you, kind of a thing. Yeah, it's a fascinating thing. The other thing too that I heard somebody say this one time, and I'm like, how are you getting there? But when you go read some of the other stuff, it does kind of point to the fact that, and even in Genesis, you can kind of read it that I don't think they knew rain until the flood.
Yeah.
Everything was watered. You definitely read in Genesis in the garden, everything was watered from the ground up.
Yeah.
And it even said God had not sent the rains on the earth yet.
Yeah.
But it also kind of says in there that, I'm going to butcher it, but it was worded because he hadn't sent anybody to work the garden yet, maybe. The other thing that's interesting in Genesis that, again, when you're not looking with lenses close enough, you skim past it. And that's the fact that Adam was not created in the garden.
Yeah, he was put in the garden. I have a whole theory not a theory. I like to share the theory with someone. I believe that he was created in Egypt.
Really?
Yes.
Why do you think that?
Because you have to go through the whole, it's just not Egypt, but God created Adam. Let's just say for grins right now, Eden is where Jerusalem is.
Okay.
He puts him in the garden. He sends him towards Babylon.
Which would be east. Yeah.
They get come back. Where do they end up? Where does Abraham's descendants end up? Egypt. Where do they go from Egypt?
Back east again.
Back east towards Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
It's like one big
kind of loop.
Yes. So we're created. We're put in God's fellowship. We screw up. He sends us to captivity. He brings us back to create in something good. He puts us in paradise or what have you. We screw up again.
We're really good at it.
We get thrown. I mean, it's just like a big circle.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating too. Like when you go read the Old Testament, you're like, my goodness, you people were just the hard-headedest people ever.
And even Jesus, he was born in Bethlehem.
Okay.
They went to Egypt to escape the king. Mm-hmm. And he comes back, but he never did go to Babylon.
Yeah, because from everything that I've read, Babylon would be basically over in Iraq, kind of down by the Persian Gulf.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no, he never goes over there. Because it's a clip.
Yeah, because God was there to redeem us.
I said this earlier and we kind of just skimmed past. Do you know where the city of Dan was?
No, I don't.
Literally.
Well, yes, but I can't
almost due west. It's probably the closest geographical city and town, I do believe, to Caesarea Philippi, due west.
Isn't that interesting?
Isn't that interesting indeed? The other one that I put together here lately that I'm like, that's pretty fascinating too. Paul. So Paul was on the road to Damascus. Do you know where the Damascus Road runs? Guess what?
Is it north?
Right next to Mount Hermon.
Yep. It was like it was kind of north of his travels.
I just see God going, like, here you are, you're walking with the devil and you're walking in his territory and I'm going to pluck you right out of it. But it was actually Christ that talked to him.
Yeah. And where'd he put him? Where'd he go?
I forget where he went right after that.
Sinai. 2 years, 3 years. I think Jesus taught him on Sinai.
Fascinating.
On Sinai.
We went from giants to Paul. That's a good show right there.
Yeah, it is.
All right. We got to figure out what we're going to do next week, but we talked about aliens. Maybe. We could spend more time on giants too. But maybe we'll come back to giants.
This was good.
Oh, yeah.
I liked it.
It's been fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a fun journey. Well, I hope you all have enjoyed the journey too. I think we're at our magic hour and a half, Ben. This is pretty much where we seem to land every week. So thank you guys for joining us. And it'll be interesting to see what we get into next week.
Yes.
What kind of trouble we can get ourselves into.
Yes.
But thanks you all very much. Take care.
Bye.